Chapter 67,
Part 2
of The Golden Bough. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Golden Bough by Sir James Frazer, Chapter 67.
Part 2
The External Soul in Folk Custom. Section 4. The Ritual of Death and Resurrection. This view of totemism throws light on the class of religious rites of which no adequate explanation, so far as I am aware, has yet been offered. Amongst many savage tribes, especially such as are known to practice totemism, it is customary for lads at puberty to undergo certain initiatory rites, of which one of the commonest is a pretense of killing the lad and bringing him to life again. Such rites become intelligible if we suppose that their substance consists in extracting the youth's soul in order to transfer it to his totem. For the extraction of his soul would naturally be supposed to kill the youth, or at least to throw him into a death-like trance, which the savage hardly distinguishes from death. His recovery would then be attributed either to the gradual recovery of his system from the violent shock which it had received, or, more probably, to the infusion into him of fresh life drawn from the totem. Thus the essence of these initiatory rites, so far as they consist in a simulation of death and resurrection, would be an exchange of life or souls between the man and his totem. The primitive belief in the possibility of such an exchange of souls comes clearly out in a story of a Basque hunter who affirmed that he had been killed by a bear, but that the bear had, after killing him, breathed its own soul into him, so that the bear's body was now dead, but he himself was a bear, being animated by the bear's soul. This revival of the dead hunter as a bear is exactly analogous to what, on the theory here suggested, is supposed to take place in the ceremony of killing a lad at puberty and bringing him to life again. The lad dies as a man and comes to life again as an animal. The animal soul is now in him, and his human soul is in the animal. With good right, therefore, does he call himself a bear or a wolf, etc., according to his totem, and with good right does he treat the bears or the wolves, etc., as his brethren, since in these animals are lodged the souls of himself and his kindred. Examples of this supposed death and resurrection and initiation are as follows. In the Wongi or Wongibon tribe of New South Wales, the youths on approaching manhood are initiated at a secret ceremony, which none but initiated men may witness. Part of the proceedings consists in knocking out a tooth and giving a new name to the novice, indicative of the change from youth to manhood. While the teeth are being knocked out, an instrument known as a bull roarer, which consists of a flat piece of wood with serrated edges tied to the end of a string, is swung round so as to produce a loud humming noise. The uninitiated are not allowed to see this instrument. Women are forbidden to witness the ceremonies under pain of death. It is given out that the youths are each met in turn by a mythical being called Thuremlin, or more commonly known as Duramolan, who takes the youth to a distance, kills him, and in some instances cuts him up, after which he restores him to life and knocks out a tooth. Their belief in the power of Thuremlin is said to be undoubted. The Ularoi of the upper Darling River said that at initiation the boy met a ghost, who killed him and brought him to life again as a young man. Among the natives on the lower Lachlan and Mire rivers it was Thrumalun or Daramulun, who was thought to slay and resuscitate the novices. In the Unmatjera tribe of Central Australia, women and children believe that a spirit called Twanyarika kills the youth and afterwards brings him to life again during the period of initiation. The rites of initiation in this tribe, as in the other central tribes, comprise the operations of circumcision and subincision, and as soon as the second of these has been performed on him, the young man receives from his father a sacred stick, with which, he is told, his spirit was associated in the remotest past. While he is out in the bush recovering from his wounds, he must swing the ball roarer, or a being who lives up in the sky will swoop down and carry him off. In the Bibinga tribe on the western coast of the Gulf of Carpentaria, the women and children believe that the noise of the bull roarer at initiation is made by a spirit named Katajalina, who lives in an ant hill and comes out and eats up the boy, afterwards restoring him to life. Similarly, among the neighbors of Anula, the women imagine that the droning sound of the bull roarer is produced by a spirit called Nabaya, who swallows the lads at initiation, and afterwards disgorges them in the form of initiated men. Among the tribes settled on the southern coast of New South Wales, of which the Coast Murring tribe may be regarded as typical, the drama of resurrection from the dead was exhibited in a graphic form to the novices at initiation. The ceremony has been described for us by an eyewitness. A man, disguised with stringy bark fibre, lay down in a grave, and was lightly covered up with sticks and earth. In his hand he held a small bush, which appeared to be growing in the soil, and other bushes were stuck in the ground to heighten the effect. Then the novices were brought and placed beside the grave. Next, a procession of men, disguised in stringy bark fibre, drew near. They represented a party of medicine men, guided by two reverend seniors, who had come on pilgrimage to the grave of a brother medicine man, who lay buried there. When the little procession, chanting an invocation to Daramulun, had defiled from among the rocks and trees into the open, it drew up on the side of the grave opposite to the novices, the two old men taking up a position in the rear of the dancers. For some time the dance and song went on till the tree that seemed to grow from the grave began to quiver. "Look there!" cried the men to the novices, pointing to the trembling leaves. As they looked, the tree quivered more and more, then was violently agitated and fell to the ground, while amid the excited dancing of the dancers and the chanting of the choir, the supposed dead man spurned from him the superincumbent mass of sticks and leaves, and springing to his feet, danced his magic dance in the grave itself, and exhibited in his mouth the magic substances which he was supposed to have received from Dramulun in person. Some tribes in northern New Guinea, the Yabim, Bakua, Kai, and Tami, like many Australian tribes, require every male member of the tribe to be circumcised before he ranks as a full-grown man, and the tribal initiation, of which circumcision is the central feature, is conceived by them, as by some Australian tribes, as a process of being swallowed and disgorged by a mythical monster whose voice is heard in the humming sound of the bull roarer. Indeed, the New Guinea tribes not only impress this belief on the minds of women and children, but enact it in a dramatic form at the actual rites of initiation, at which no woman or uninitiated person may be present. For this purpose a hut about 100 feet long is erected either in the village or in a lonely part of the forest. It is modelled in the shape of the mythical monster. At the end which represents his head it is high, and it tapers away at the other end. A betel palm, grubbed up with the roots, stands for the backbone of the great being and its clustering fibres for his hair, and to complete the resemblance the butt end of the building is adorned by a native artist with a pair of goggle eyes and a gaping mouth. When, after a tearful parting from their mothers and womenfolk, who believe or pretend to believe in the monster that swallows their dear ones, the awe-struck novices are brought face to face with this imposing structure, the huge creature emits a sullen growl, which is in fact no other than the humming note of the bull-roarers swung by men concealed in the monster's belly. The actual process of deglutition is variously enacted. Among the Tami it is represented by causing the candidates to defile past a row of men who hold bull-roarers over their heads. Among the Kai it is more graphically set forth by making them pass under a scaffold on which stands a man, who makes a gesture of swallowing, and takes in fact a gulp of water as each trembling novice passes beneath him. But the present of a pig, opportunely offered for the redemption of the youth, induces the monster to relent and disgorge his victim. The man who represents the monster accepts the gift vicariously. A gurgling sound is heard, and the water which has just been swallowed descends in a jet on the novice. This signifies that the young man has been released from the monster's belly. However, he has now to undergo the more painful and dangerous operation of circumcision. It follows immediately that the cut made by the knife of the operator is explained to be a bite or scratch which the monster inflicted on the novice in spewing him out of his capacious maw. While the operation is proceeding, a prodigious noise is made by the swinging of bull-roarers to represent the roar of the dreadful being who is in the act of swallowing the young man. When, as sometimes happens, a lad dies from the effect of the operation, he is buried secretly in the forest, and his sorrowing mother is told that the monster has a pig's stomach as well as a human stomach, and that unfortunately her son slipped into the wrong stomach, from which it was impossible to extricate him. After they have been circumcised, the lads must remain for some months in seclusion, shunning all contact with women and even the sight of them. They live in the long hut which represents the monster's belly. When at last the lads, now ranking as initiated men, are brought back with great pomp and ceremony to the village, they are received with sobs and tears of joy by the women, as if the grave had given up its dead. At first the young men keep their eyes rigidly closed or even sealed with a plaster of calk, and they appear not to understand the words of command which are given them by an elder. Gradually, however, they come to themselves as if awakening from a stupor, and next day they bathe and wash off the crust of white chalk with which their bodies had been coated. It is highly significant that all these tribes of New Guinea apply the same word to the bull-roarer and to the monster, who are supposed to swallow the novices at circumcision, and whose fearful roar is represented by the hum of the harmless wooden instruments. Further, it deserves to be noted that in 3 languages out of the 4, the same word which is applied to the bull-roarer and to the monster means also a ghost or spirit of the dead, while in the 4th language, the Kai, it signifies grandfather. From this it seems to follow that the being who swallows and disgorges the novices at initiation is believed to be a powerful ghost or ancestral spirit, and that the bull-roarer which bears his name is his material representative. That would explain the jealous secrecy with which the sacred implement is kept from the sight of women. While they are not in use, the bull-roarers are stowed away in the men's club-houses, which no woman may enter. Indeed, no woman or uninitiated person may set eyes on a bull-roarer under pain of death. Similarly, among the Tugeri or Kaya, a large Papuan tribe on the south coast of Dutch New Guinea, the name of the bull-roarer, which they call Sosom, is given to a mythical giant, who is supposed to appear every year with the southeast monsoon. When he comes, a festival is held in his honor, and bull-roarers are swung. Boys are presented to the giant, and he kills them, but considerately brings them to life again. In certain districts of Viti Levu, the largest of the Fijian islands, the drama of death and resurrection used to be acted with much solemnity before the eyes of young men at initiation. In a sacred enclosure they were shown a row of dead or seemingly dead men lying on the ground, their bodies cut open and covered with blood, their entrails protruding. But at a yell from the high priest, the counterfeit dead men started to their feet and ran down to the river to cleanse themselves from the blood and guts of pigs with which they were beslobbered. Soon they marched back to the sacred enclosure as if come to life, clean, fresh, and garlanded, swaying their bodies in time to the music of a solemn hymn, and took their places in front of the novices. Such was the drama of death and resurrection. The people of Rook, an island between New Guinea and New Britain, hold festivals at which one or two disguised men, their heads covered with wooden masks, go dancing through the village, followed by all the other men. They demand that the circumcised boys who have not yet been swallowed by Marsaba, or the devil, shall be given up to them. The boys, trembling and shrieking, are delivered to them, and must creep between the legs of the disguised men. Then the procession moves through the village again, and announces that Marsaba has eaten up the boys, and will not disgorge them till he receives a present of pigs, taro, and so forth. So all the villagers, according to their means, contribute provisions, which are then consumed in the name of Marsaba. In the west of Ceram, boys at puberty are admitted to the Kakian Association. Modern writers have commonly regarded this association as primarily a political league instituted to resist foreign domination. In reality, its objects are purely religious and social, though it is possible that the priests may have occasionally used their powerful influence for political ends. The society is in fact merely one of those widely diffused primitive institutions of which a chief object is the initiation of young men. In recent years, the true nature of the association has been duly recognized by the distinguished Dutch ethnologist J.G.F. Riedel. The Kakian house is an oblong wooden shed, situated under the darkest trees in the depth of the forest, and is built to admit so little light that it is impossible to see what goes on in it. Every village has such a house. Thither the boys who are to be initiated are conducted blindfold, followed by their parents and relations. Each boy is led by the hand of two men, who act as his sponsors or guardians, looking after them during the period of initiation. When all are assembled before the shed, the high priest calls aloud upon the devils. Immediately a hideous uproar is heard to proceed from the shed. It is made by men with bamboo trumpets, who have been secretly introduced into the building by a back door, but the women and children think it is made by the devils, and are much terrified. Then the priests enter the shed, followed by the boys, one at a time. As soon as each boy has disappeared within the precincts, a dull chopping sound is heard, a fearful cry rings out, and a sword or spear dripping with blood is thrust through the roof of the shed. This is a token that the boy's head has been cut off, and that the devil has carried him away to the other world, there to regenerate and transform him. So, at the sight of the bloody sword, the mothers weep and wail, crying that the devil has murdered their children. In some places, it would seem, the boys are pushed through an opening made in the shape of a crocodile's jaws or a cassowary's beak, and it is then said that the devil has swallowed them. The boys remain in the shed for 5 or 9 days. Sitting in the dark, they hear the blast of the bamboo trumpets, and from time to time the sound of musket shots and the clash of swords. Every day they bathe, and their faces and bodies are smeared with a yellow dye to give them the appearance of having been swallowed by the devil. During his stay in the Kakian house, each boy has 1 or 2 crosses tattooed with thorns on his breast or arm. When they are not sleeping, the lads must sit in a crouching posture without moving a muscle. As they sit in a row cross-legged, with their hands stretched out, the chief takes his trumpet, and placing the mouth of it on the hands of each lad, speaks through it in strange tones, imitating the voice of the spirits. He warns the lads, under pain of death, to observe the rules of the Kakian society, and never to reveal what has passed in the Kakian house. The novices are also told by the priests to behave well to their blood relations, and are taught the traditions and secrets of the tribe. Meantime, the mothers and sisters of the lads have gone home to weep and mourn. But in a day or two the men who acted as guardians or sponsors to the novices returned to the village with the glad tidings that the devil, at the intercession of the priests, has restored the lads to life. The men who bring this news come in a fainting state and daubed with mud, like messengers freshly arrived from the nether world. Before leaving the Kakian house, each lad receives from the priest a stick adorned at both ends with a cock's or cassowary's feathers. The sticks are supposed to have been given to the lads by the devil at the time when he restored them to life, and they serve as a token that the youths have been in the spirit land. When they return to their homes, they totter in their walk and enter the house backward, as if they had forgotten how to walk properly, or they enter the house by the back door. If a plate of food is given to them, they hold it upside down. They remain dumb, indicating their wants by signs only. All this is to show that they are still under the influence of the devil or the spirits. Their sponsors have to teach them all the common acts of life, as if they were new-born children. Further, upon leaving the Kakian house, the boys are strictly forbidden to eat of certain fruits until the next celebration of the rites has taken place. And for 20 or 30 days their hair may not be combed by their mothers or sisters. At the end of that time, the high priest takes them to a lonely place in the forest and cuts off a lock of hair from the crown of each of their heads. After these initiatory rites, the lads are deemed men and may marry. It would be a scandal if they married before. In the region of the Lower Congo, a simulation of death and resurrection is, or rather used to be, practiced by the members of a guild or secret society called Dembo. In the practice of Dembo, the initiating doctors get someone to fall down in a pretended fit, and in that state he is carried away to an enclosed place outside the town. This is called dying Dembo. Others follow suit, generally boys and girls, but often young men and women. They are supposed to have died, but the parents and friends supply food, and after a period varying, according to custom, from 3 months to 3 years, it is arranged that the doctor shall bring them to life again. When the doctor's fee has been paid, the money, or goods, saved for a feast, the Dembo people are brought to life. At first they pretend to know no one and nothing. They do not even know how to masticate food, and friends have to perform that office for them. They want everything nice that anyone uninitiated may have, and beat them if it is not granted, or even strangle and kill people. They do not get into trouble for this, because it is thought that they do not know better. Sometimes they carry on the pretense of talking gibberish and behaving as if they had returned from the spirit world. After this they are known by another name, peculiar to those who have died Dembo. We hear of the custom far along on the upper river, as well as in the cataract region." Among some of the Indian tribes of North America there exist certain religious associations which are only open to candidates who have gone through a pretense of being killed and brought to life again. In 1766 or 1767 Captain Jonathan Carver witnessed the admission of a candidate to an association called the Friendly Society of the Spirit among the Naudowessies, a Siouan or Dakotan tribe in the region of the Great Lakes. The candidate knelt before the chief, who told him that "he himself was now agitated by the same spirit which he should in a few moments communicate to him; that it would strike him dead, but that he would instantly be restored again to life." To this he added that the communication, however terrifying, was a necessary introduction to the advantages enjoyed by the community into which he was on the point of being admitted. As he spoke this, he appeared to be greatly agitated, till at last his emotions became so violent that his countenance was distorted, and his whole frame convulsed. At this juncture he threw something that appeared both in shape and colour like a small bean at the young man, which seemed to enter his mouth, and he instantly fell as motionless as if he had been shot." For a time the man lay like dead, but under a shower of blows he showed signs of consciousness, and finally, discharging from his mouth the bean or whatever it was that the chief had thrown at him, he came to life. In other tribes, for example the Ojibways, Winnebagos, and Dakotas or Sioux, the instrument by which the candidate is apparently slain is the medicine bag. The bag is made of the skin of an animal, such as an otter, wild cat, serpent, bear, raccoon, wolf, owl, weasel, of which it roughly preserves the shape. Each member of the society has one of these bags, in which he keeps the odds and ends that make up his medicine or charms. "They believe that from the miscellaneous contents in the belly of the skin bag or animal there issues a spirit or breath, which has the power not only to knock down and kill a man, but also to set him up and restore him to life." The mode of killing a man with one of these medicine bags is to thrust it at him; he falls like dead, but a second thrust of the bag restores him to life. A ceremony witnessed by the castaway John R. Jewett during his captivity among the Indians of Nootka Sound doubtless belongs to this class of customs. The Indian king or chief "discharged a pistol close to his son's ear, who immediately fell down as if killed, upon which all the women of the house set up a most lamentable cry, tearing handfuls of hair from their heads, and exclaiming that the prince was dead. At the same time a great number of the inhabitants rushed into the house armed with their daggers, muskets, etc., inquiring the cause of their outcry. These were immediately followed by two others dressed in wolf skins, with masks over their face representing the head of that animal. The latter came in on their hands and feet in the manner of a beast, and taking up the prince, carried him off upon their backs, retiring in the same manner they entered." In another place Jewett mentions that the young prince, a lad of about 11 years of age, wore a mask in imitation of a wolf's head. Now, as the Indians of this part of America are divided into totem clans, of which the wolf clan is one of the principal, and as the members of each clan are in the habit of wearing some portion of the totem animal about their person, it is probable that the prince belonged to the wolf clan, and that the ceremony described by Jewett represented the killing of the lad in order that he might be born anew as a wolf, much in the same way that the Basque hunter supposed himself to have been killed and to have come to life again as a bear. This conjectural explanation of the ceremony has, since it was first put forward, been to some extent confirmed by the researches of Dr. Franz Boas among these Indians, though it would seem that the community to which the chief's son thus obtained admission was not so much a totem clan as a secret society called Tlokoala, whose members imitated wolves. Every new member of the society must be initiated by the wolves. At night a pack of wolves, personated by Indians dressed in wolf skins and wearing wolf masks, make their appearance, seize the novice, and carry him into the woods. When the wolves are heard outside the village coming to fetch away the novice, all the members of the society blacken their faces and sing, "Among all the tribes is great excitement, because I am Tlokoala." Next day the wolves bring back the novice dead, and the members of the society have to revive him. The wolves are supposed to have put a magic stone into his body, which must be removed before he can come to life. Till this is done, the pretended corpse is left lying outside the house. Two wizards go and remove the stone, which appears to be quartz, and then the novice is resuscitated. Among the Niska Indians of British Columbia, who are divided into four principal clans with the raven, the wolf, the eagle, and the bear for their respective totems, the novice at initiation is always brought back by an artificial totem animal. Thus, when a man was about to be initiated into a secret society called Olala, his friends drew their knives and pretended to kill him. In reality, they let him slip away, while they cut off the head of a dummy which had been adroitly substituted for him. Then they laid the decapitated dummy down and covered it over, and the women began to mourn and wail. His relations gave a funeral banquet and solemnly burnt the effigy. In short, they held a regular funeral. For a whole year the novice remained absent and was seen by none but members of the secret society. But at the end of that time he came back alive, carried by an artificial animal which represented his totem. In these ceremonies the essence of the rite appears to be the killing of the novice in his character of a man, and his restoration to life in the form of the animal which is thenceforward to be, if not his guardian spirit, at least linked to him in a peculiarly intimate relation. It is to be remembered that the Indians of Guatemala, whose life was bound up with an animal, were supposed to have the power of appearing in the shape of the particular creature with which they were thus sympathetically united. Hence it seems not unreasonable to conjecture that in like manner the Indians of British Columbia may imagine that their life depends on the life of some one of that species of creature to which they assimilate themselves by their costume. At least, if that is not an article of belief with the Columbian Indians of the present day, it may very well have been so with their ancestors in the past, and thus may have helped to mould the rites and ceremonies both of the totem clans and of the secret societies. For though these two sorts of communities differ in respect of the mode in which membership of them is obtained, a man being born into his totem clan but admitted into a secret society later in life, we can hardly doubt that they are near akin and have their roots in the same mode of thought. That thought, if I am right, is the possibility of establishing a sympathetic relation with an animal, a spirit, or other mighty being with whom a man deposits for safe keeping his soul or some part of it, and from whom he receives in return a gift of magical powers. Thus, on the theory here suggested, wherever totemism is found and wherever a pretence is made of killing and bringing to life again the novice at initiation, there may exist or have existed not only a belief in the possibility of permanently depositing the soul in some external object, animal, plant, or what not, but an actual intention of so doing. If the question is put, why do men desire to deposit their life outside their bodies? The answer can only be that, like the giant in the fairy tale, they think it safer to do so than to carry it about with them, just as people deposit their money with a banker rather than carry it on their persons. We have seen that at critical periods the life or soul is sometimes temporarily stowed away in a safe place till the danger is past. But institutions like totemism are not resorted to merely on special occasions of danger. They are systems into which everyone, or at least every male, is obliged to be initiated at a certain period of life. Now the period of life at which initiation takes place is regularly puberty, and this fact suggests that the special danger which totemism and systems like it are intended to obviate is supposed not to arise till sexual maturity has been attained; in fact, that the danger apprehended is believed to attend the relation of the sexes to each other. It would be easy to prove by a long array of facts that the sexual relation is associated in the primitive mind with many serious perils, but the exact nature of the danger apprehended is still obscure. We may hope that a more exact acquaintance with savage modes of thought will in time disclose this central mystery of primitive society, and will thereby furnish the clue, not only to totemism, but to the origin of the marriage system. End of chapter 67. Part 2.
Part 50 of The Golden Bough, being chapters 68 and 69. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Golden Bough by Sir James Frazer. Chapter 68. The Golden Bough. Thus the view that Balder's life was in the mistletoe is entirely in harmony with primitive modes of thought. It may indeed sound like a contradiction that if his life was in the mistletoe he should nevertheless have been killed by a blow from the plant. But when a person's life is conceived as embodied in a particular object, with the existence of which his own existence is inseparably bound up, and the destruction of which involves his own, the object in question may be regarded and spoken of indifferently as his life or his death, as happens in the fairy tales. Hence, if a man's death is in an object, it is perfectly natural that he should be killed by a blow from it. In the fairy tales, Koshchei the Deathless is killed by a blow from the egg or the stone in which his life or death is secreted. The ogres burst when a certain grain of sand, doubtless containing their life or death, is carried over their heads. The magician dies when the stone in which his life or death is contained is put under his pillow, and the Tartar hero is warned that he may be killed by the golden arrow or golden sword in which his soul has been stowed away. The idea that the life of the oak was in the mistletoe was probably suggested, as I have said, by the observation that in winter the mistletoe growing on the oak remains green while the oak itself is leafless. But the position of the plant, growing not from the ground but from the trunk or branches of the tree, might confirm this idea. Primitive man might think that, like himself, the oak spirit had sought to deposit his life in some safe place, and for this purpose had pitched on the mistletoe, which, being in a sense neither on earth nor in heaven, might be supposed to be fairly out of harm's way. In a former chapter we saw that primitive man seeks to preserve the life of his human divinities by keeping them poised between earth and heaven, as the place where they are least likely to be assailed by the dangers that encompass the life of man on earth. We can therefore understand why it has been the rule both of ancient and of modern folk medicine that the mistletoe should not be allowed to touch the ground. Were it to touch the ground, its healing virtue would be gone. This may be a survival of the old superstition that the plant in which the life of the sacred tree was concentrated should not be exposed to the risk incurred by contact with the earth. In an Indian legend, which offers a parallel to the Balder myth, Indra swore to the demon Namuchi that he would slay him neither by day nor by night, neither with staff nor with bow, neither with the palm of the hand nor with the fist, neither with the wet nor with the dry. But he killed him in the morning twilight by sprinkling over him the foam of the sea. The foam of the sea is just such an object as a savage might choose to put his life in, because it occupies that sort of intermediate or nondescript position between earth and sky, or sea and sky, in which primitive man sees safety. It is therefore not surprising that the foam of the river should be the totem of a clan in India. Again, the view that the mistletoe owes its mystic character partly to its not growing on the ground is confirmed by a parallel superstition about the mountain ash or rowan tree. In Jutland a rowan that is found growing out of the top of another tree is esteemed exceeding effective against witchcraft, since it does not grow on the ground, witches have no power over it. If it is to have its full effect it must be cut on Ascension Day. Hence it is placed over doors to prevent the ingress of witches. In Sweden and Norway also magical properties are ascribed to a flying rowan, flögrön, that is, to a rowan which is found growing not in the ordinary fashion on the ground, but on another tree, or on a roof, or in a cleft of the rock, where it has sprouted from seed scattered by birds. They say that a man who is out in the dark should have a bit of flying rowan with him to chew, else he runs a risk of being bewitched and being unable to stir from the spot. Just as in Scandinavia the parasitic rowan is deemed a countercharm to sorcery, so in Germany the parasitic mistletoe is still commonly considered a protection against witchcraft, and in Sweden, as we saw, The mistletoe which is gathered on Midsummer Eve is attached to the ceiling of the house, the horse's stall, or the cow's crib, in the belief that this renders the Troll powerless to injure man or beast. The view that the mistletoe was not merely the instrument of Balder's death, but that it contained his life, is countenanced by the analogy of a Scottish superstition. Tradition ran that the fate of the Hayes of Errol, an estate in Perthshire near the Firth of Tay, was bound up with the mistletoe that grew on a certain great oak. A member of the Hay family has recorded the old belief as follows. Among the Low Country families the badges are now almost generally forgotten, but it appears by an ancient manuscript and the traditions of a few old people in Perthshire that the badge of the Hays was the mistletoe. There was formerly in the neighbourhood of Errol, and not far from the Falcon Stone, a vast oak of an unknown age, and upon which grew a profusion of the plant. Many charms and legends were considered to be connected with the tree, and the duration of the family of Hay was said to be united with its existence. It was believed that a sprig of the mistletoe cut by a Hay on Allhallowmas Eve with a new dirk, and after surrounding the tree 3 times sunwise, and pronouncing a certain spell, was a sure charm against all glamour or witchery, and an infallible guard in the day of battle. A spray gathered in the same manner was placed in the cradle of infants, and thought to defend them from being changed for elf bairns by the fairies. Finally, it was affirmed that when the root of the oak had perished, the grass should grow in the hearth of Errol, and a raven should sit in the falcon's nest. The 2 most unlucky deeds which could be done by one of the name of Hay was to kill a white falcon, and to cut down a limb from the oak of Errol. When the old tree was destroyed I could never learn. The estate has been sold out of the family of Hay, and of course it is said that the fatal oak was cut down a short time before. The old superstition is recorded in verses which are traditionally ascribed to Thomas the Rhymer. While the mistletoe bats on Errol's aik, and that aik stands fast, the Hays shall flourish, and their good grey hawk shall nacht flinch before the blast. But when the root of the aik decays, and the mistletoe dwines on its withered breast, the grass shall grow on Errol's hearth stane, and the corby roop in the falcon's nest. It is not a new opinion that the Golden Bough was the mistletoe. True, Virgil does not identify, but only compares it with mistletoe, but this may be only a poetical device to cast a mystic glamour over the humble plant. Or, more probably, his description was based on a popular superstition that at a certain time the mistletoe blazed out into a supernatural golden glory. The poet tells how 2 doves, guiding Aeneas to the gloomy vale in whose depth grew the Golden Bough, alighted upon a tree, whence shone a flickering gleam of gold. As in the woods in winter cold the mistletoe, a plant not native to its tree, is green with fresh leaves, and twines its yellow berries about the boles, such seemed upon the shady holm oak the leafy gold, so rustled in the gentle breeze the golden leaf. Here Virgil definitely describes the Golden Bough as growing on a holm oak, and compares it with the mistletoe. The inference is almost inevitable that the Golden Bough was nothing but the mistletoe seen through the haze of poetry or of popular superstition. Now grounds have been shown for believing that the priest of the Arician grove, the king of the wood, personified the tree on which grew the Golden Bough. Hence, if that tree was the oak, the king of the wood must have been a personification of the oak spirit. It is therefore easy to understand why, before he could be slain, it was necessary to break the Golden Bough. As an oak spirit, his life or death was in the mistletoe on the oak, and so long as the mistletoe remained intact, he, like Balder, could not die. To slay him, therefore, it was necessary to break the mistletoe, and probably, as in the case of Balder, to throw it at him. And to complete the parallel, it is only necessary to suppose that the king of the wood was formerly burnt, dead or alive, at the midsummer fire festival, which, as we have seen, was annually celebrated in the Arician grove. The perpetual fire which burned in the grove, like the perpetual fire which burned in the temple of Vesta at Rome and under the oak at Romove, was probably fed with the sacred oak wood, and thus it would be in a great fire of oak that the king of the wood formerly met his end. At a later time, as I have suggested, his annual tenure of office was lengthened or shortened, as the case might be, by the rule which allowed him to live so long as he could prove his divine right by the strong hand. But he only escaped the fire to fall by the sword. Thus it seems that at a remote age in the heart of Italy, beside the sweet lake of Nemi, the same fiery tragedy was annually enacted which Italian merchants and soldiers were afterwards to witness among their rude kindred, the Celts of Gaul, and which, if the Roman eagles had ever swooped on Norway, might have been found repeated with little difference among the barbarous Aryans of the north. The rite was probably an essential feature in the ancient Aryan worship of the oak. It only remains to ask, why was the mistletoe called the Golden Bough? The whitish yellow of the mistletoe berries is hardly enough to account for the name, for Virgil says that the bough was altogether golden, stem as well as leaves. Perhaps the name may be derived from the rich golden yellow which a bough of mistletoe assumes when it has been cut and kept for some months. The bright tint is not confined to the leaves, but spreads to the stalks as well, so that the whole branch appears to be indeed a golden bough. Breton peasants hang up great bunches of mistletoe in front of their cottages, and in the month of June these bunches are conspicuous for the bright golden tinge of their foliage. In some parts of Brittany, especially about Morbihan, branches of mistletoe are hung over the doors of stables and byres to protect the horses and cattle, probably against witchcraft. The yellow colour of the withered bough may partly explain why the mistletoe has been sometimes supposed to possess the property of disclosing treasures in the earth, for on the principles of homoeopathic magic there is a natural affinity between a yellow bough and yellow gold. This suggestion is confirmed by the analogy of the marvellous properties popularly ascribed to the mythical fern seed, which is popularly supposed to bloom like gold or fire on Midsummer Eve. Thus in Bohemia it is said that "on St. John's Day fern seed blooms with golden blossoms that gleam like fire." Now it is a property of this mythical fern seed that whoever has it, or will ascend a mountain holding it in his hand on Midsummer Eve, will discover a vein of gold, or will see the treasures of the earth shining with a bluish flame. In Russia they say that if you succeed in catching the wondrous bloom of the fern at midnight on Midsummer Eve, you have only to throw it up into the air, and it will fall like a star on the very spot where a treasure lies hidden. In Brittany treasure seekers gather fern seed at midnight on Midsummer Eve, and keep it till Palm Sunday of the following year. Then they strew the seed on the ground where they think a treasure is concealed. Tyrolese peasants imagine that hidden treasures can be seen glowing like flame on Midsummer Eve, and that fern seed, gathered at this mystic season, with the usual precautions, will help to bring the buried gold to the surface. In the Swiss canton of Freiburg, people used to watch beside a fern on St. John's night, in the hope of winning a treasure, which the devil himself sometimes brought to them. In Bohemia they say that he who procures the golden bloom of the fern at this season has thereby the key to all hidden treasures, and that if maidens will spread a cloth under the fast fading bloom, red gold will drop into it. And in the Tyrol and Bohemia, if you place fern seed among money, the money will never decrease, however much of it you spend. Sometimes the fern seed is supposed to bloom on Christmas night, and whoever catches it will become very rich. In Styria they say that by gathering fern seed on Christmas night you can force the devil to bring you a bag of money. Thus, on the principle of like by like, fern seed is supposed to discover gold because it is itself golden, and for a similar reason it enriches its possessor with an unfailing supply of gold. But while the fern seed is described as golden, it is equally described as glowing and fiery. Hence, when we consider that 2 great days for gathering the fabulous seed are Midsummer Eve and Christmas, that is, the 2 solstices, for Christmas is nothing but an old heathen celebration of the winter solstice, we are led to regard the fiery aspect of the fern seed as primary, and its golden aspect as secondary and derivative. Fernseed, in fact, would seem to be an emanation of the sun's fire at the two turning points of its course, the summer and winter solstices. This view is confirmed by a German story in which a hunter is said to have procured fernseed by shooting at the sun on Midsummer Day at noon. 3 drops of blood fell down, which he caught in a white cloth, and these blood drops were the fernseed. Here the blood is clearly the blood of the sun, from which the fernseed is thus directly derived. Thus it may be taken as probable that fernseed is golden, because it is believed to be an emanation of the sun's golden fire. Now, like fernseed, the mistletoe is gathered either at midsummer or at Christmas, that is, either at the summer or at the winter solstice, and like fernseed it is supposed to possess the power of revealing treasures in the earth. On Midsummer Eve people in Sweden make divining rods of mistletoe, or of 4 different kinds of wood, one of which must be mistletoe. The treasure seeker places the rod on the ground after sundown, and when it rests directly over treasure, the rod begins to move as if it were alive. Now, if the mistletoe discovers gold, it must be in its character of the golden bough, and if it is gathered at the solstices, must not the golden bough, like the golden fern seed, be an emanation of the sun's fire? The question cannot be answered with a simple affirmative. We have seen that the old Aryans perhaps kindled the solstitial and other ceremonial fires in part as sun charms, that is, with the intention of supplying the sun with fresh fire. And as these fires were usually made by the friction or combustion of oak wood, it may have appeared to the ancient Aryan that the sun was periodically recruited from the fire which resided in the sacred oak. In other words, the oak may have seemed to him the original storehouse or reservoir of the fire which was from time to time drawn out to feed the sun. But if the life of the oak was conceived to be in the mistletoe must, on that view, have contained the seed or germ of the fire which was elicited by friction from the wood of the oak. Thus, instead of saying that the mistletoe was an emanation of the sun's fire, it might be more correct to say that the sun's fire was regarded as an emanation of the mistletoe. No wonder, then, that the mistletoe shone with a golden splendour, and was called the Golden Bough. Probably, however, like fernseed, it was thought to assume its golden aspect only at those stated times, especially midsummer, when fire was drawn from the oak to light up the sun. At Pulverbatch in Shropshire it was believed within living memory that the oak tree blooms on Midsummer Eve and the blossom withers before daylight. A maiden who wishes to know her lot in marriage should spread a white cloth under the tree at night, and in the morning she will find a little dust, which is all that remains of the flower. She should place the pinch of dust under her pillow, and then her future husband will appear to her in her dreams. This fleeting bloom of the oak, if I am right, was probably the mistletoe in its character of the golden bough. The conjecture is confirmed by the observation that in Wales a real sprig of mistletoe gathered on Midsummer Eve is similarly placed under the pillow to induce prophetic dreams, and further the mode of catching the imaginary bloom of the oak in a white cloth is exactly that which was employed by the Druids to catch the real mistletoe when it dropped from the bough of the oak severed by the golden sickle. As Shropshire borders on Wales, the belief that the oak blooms on Midsummer Eve may be Welsh in its immediate origin, though probably the belief is a fragment of the primitive Aryan creed. In some parts of Italy, as we saw, peasants still go out on Midsummer morning to search the oak trees for the oil of St. John, which, like the mistletoe, heals all wounds, and is perhaps the mistletoe itself in its glorified aspect. Thus it is easy to understand how a title like the Golden Bough, so little descriptive of its usual appearance on the tree, should have been applied to the seemingly insignificant parasite. Further, we can perhaps see why in antiquity mistletoe was believed to possess the remarkable property of extinguishing fire, and why in Sweden it is still kept in houses as a safeguard against conflagration. Its fiery nature marks it out, on homoeopathic principles, as the best possible cure or preventive of injury by fire. These considerations may partially explain why Virgil makes Aeneas carry a glorified bough of mistletoe with him on his descent into the gloomy subterranean world. The poet describes how at the very gates of hell there stretched a vast and gloomy wood, and how the hero, following the flight of two doves that lured him on, wandered into the depths of the immemorial forest, till he saw afar off through the shadows of the trees the flickering light of the Golden Bough illuminating the matted boughs overhead. If the mistletoe, as a yellow withered bough in the sad autumn woods, was conceived to contain the seed of fire, what better companion could a forlorn wanderer in the nether shades take with him than a bough that would be a lamp to his feet as well as a rod and staff to his hands? Armed with it he might boldly confront the dreadful spectres that would cross his path on his adventurous journey. Hence, when Aeneas, emerging from the forest, comes to the banks of the Styx, winding slow with sluggish stream through the infernal marsh, and the surly ferryman refuses him passage in his boat, he has but to draw the Golden Bough from his bosom and hold it up, and straightway the blusterer quails at the sight, and meekly receives the hero into his crazy bark, which sinks deep in the water under the unusual weight of the living man. Even in recent times, as we have seen, mistletoe has been deemed a protection against witches and trolls, and the ancients may well have credited it with the same magical virtue. And if the parasite can, as some of our peasants believe, open all locks, why should it not have served as an "open sesame" in the hands of Aeneas to unlock the gates of death? Now too we can conjecture why Virbius at Nemi came to be confounded with the sun. If Virbius was, as I have tried to show, a tree spirit, he must have been the spirit of the oak on which grew the Golden Bough. For tradition represented him as the first of the kings of the wood. As an oak spirit he must have been supposed periodically to rekindle the sun's fire, and might therefore easily be confounded with the sun itself. Similarly we can explain why Balder, an oak spirit, was described as "so fair of face and so shining that a light went forth from him," and why he should have been so often taken to be the sun. And in general we may say that in primitive society, when the only known way of making fire is by the friction of wood, the savage must necessarily conceive of fire as a property stored away, like sap or juice, in trees from which he has laboriously to extract it. The Senal Indians of California profess to believe that the whole world was once a globe of fire, whence that element passed up into the trees, and now comes out whenever two pieces of wood are rubbed together. Similarly, the Maidu Indians of California hold that the earth was primarily a globe of molten matter, and from that the principle of fire ascended through the roots into the trunk and branches of trees, whence the Indians can extract it by means of their drill. In Namoluk, one of the Caroline Islands, they say that the art of making fire was taught men by the gods. Olophaet, the cunning master of flames, gave fire to the bird Mwi, and bade him carry it to earth in his bill. So the bird flew from tree to tree, and stored away the slumbering force of the fire in the wood, from which men can elicit it by friction. In the ancient Vedic hymns of India, the fire god Agni is spoken of as born in wood, as the embryo of plants, or as distributed in plants. He is also said to have entered into all plants, or to strive after them. When he is called the embryo of trees, or of trees as well as plants, there may be a side glance at the fire produced in forests by the friction of the boughs of trees. A tree which has been struck by lightning is naturally regarded by the savage as charged with a double or triple portion of fire, for has he not seen the mighty flash enter into the trunk with his own eyes? Hence perhaps we may explain some of the many superstitious beliefs concerning trees that have been struck by lightning. When the Thompson Indians of British Columbia wished to set fire to the houses of their enemies, they shot at them arrows which were either made from a tree that had been struck by lightning, or had splinters of such wood attached to them. Wendish peasants of Saxony refuse to burn in their stoves the wood of trees that have been struck by lightning. They say that with such fuel the house would be burnt down. In like manner the Thonga of South Africa will not use such wood as fuel, nor warm themselves at a fire which has been kindled with it. On the contrary, when lightning sets fire to a tree, The Winamwanga of northern Rhodesia put out all the fires in the village and plaster the fireplaces afresh, while the head men convey the lightning kindled fire to the chief, who prays over it. The chief then sends out the new fire to all his villages, and the villagers reward his messengers for the boon. This shows that they look upon fire kindled by lightning with reverence, and the reverence is intelligible, for they speak of thunder and lightning as God himself coming down to earth. Similarly, the Maidu Indians of California believe that a great man created the world and all its inhabitants, and that lightning is nothing but the great man himself descending swiftly out of heaven and rending the trees with his flaming arm. It is a plausible theory that the reverence which the ancient peoples of Europe paid to the oak, and the connexion which they traced between the oak and their sky god, were derived from the much greater frequency with which the oak appears to be struck by lightning than any other tree of our European forests. This peculiarity of the tree has seemingly been established by a series of observations instituted within recent years by scientific inquirers who have no mythological theory to maintain. However we may explain it, whether by the easier passage of electricity through oak wood than through any other timber, or in some other way, the fact itself may well have attracted the notice of our rude forefathers who dwelt in the vast forests which then covered a large part of Europe, and they might naturally account for it in their simple religious way by supposing that the great sky god whom they worshipped, and whose awful voice they heard in the roll of thunder, loved the oak above all the trees of the wood, and often descended into it from the murky cloud in a flash of lightning, leaving a token of his presence or of his passage in the riven and blackened trunk and the blasted foliage. Such trees would thenceforth be encircled by a nimbus of glory as the visible seats of the thundering sky god. Certain it is that, like some savages, both Greeks and Romans identified their great god of the sky and of the oak with the lightning flash which struck the ground, and they regularly enclosed such a stricken spot and treated it thereafter as sacred. It is not rash to suppose that the ancestors of the Celts and Germans in the forests of Central Europe paid a like respect for like reasons to a blasted oak. This explanation of the Aryan reverence for the oak and of the association of the tree with the great god of the thunder and the sky was suggested or implied long ago by Jacob Grimm, and has been in recent years powerfully reinforced by Mr. W. Ward Fowler. It appears to be simpler and more probable than the explanation which I formerly adopted, namely, that the oak was worshipped primarily for the many benefits which our rude forefathers derived from the tree, particularly for the fire which they drew by friction from its wood, and that the connexion of the oak with the sky was an afterthought based on the belief that the flash of lightning was nothing but the spark which the sky god up aloft elicited by rubbing two pieces of oak wood against each other, just as his savage worshipper kindled fire in the forest on earth. On that theory the god of the thunder and the sky was derived from the original god of the oak. On the present theory, which I now prefer, the god of the sky and thunder was the great original deity of our Aryan ancestors, and his association with the oak was merely an inference based on the frequency with which the oak was seen to be struck by lightning. If the Aryans, as some think, roamed the wide steppes of Russia or Central Asia with their flocks and herds before they plunged into the gloom of the European forests, they may have worshipped the god of the blue or cloudy firmament and the flashing thunderbolt long before they thought of associating him with the blasted oaks in their new home. Perhaps the new theory has the further advantage of throwing light on the special sanctity ascribed to mistletoe which grows on an oak. The mere rarity of such a growth on an oak hardly suffices to explain the extent and the persistence of the superstition. A hint of its real origin is possibly furnished by the statement of Pliny that the Druids worshipped the plant because they believed it to have fallen from heaven, and to be a token that the tree on which it grew was chosen by the god himself. Can they have thought that the mistletoe dropped on the oak in a flash of lightning? The conjecture is confirmed by the name thunderbesom, which is applied to mistletoe in the Swiss canton of Aargau, for the epithet clearly implies a close connexion between the parasite and the thunder. Indeed, thunderbesom is a popular name in Germany for any bushy, nest-like excrescence growing on a branch, because such a parasitic growth is actually believed by the ignorant to be a product of lightning. If there is any truth in this conjecture, the real reason why the Druids worshipped a mistletoe-bearing oak above all other trees of the forest was a belief that every such oak had not only been struck by lightning, but bore among its branches a visible emanation of the celestial fire, so that in cutting the mistletoe with mystic rites they were securing for themselves all the magical properties of a thunderbolt. If that was so, we must apparently conclude that the mistletoe was deemed an emanation of the lightning rather than, as I have thus far argued, of the midsummer sun. Perhaps indeed we might combine the two seemingly divergent views by supposing that in the old Aryan creed the mistletoe descended from the sun on Midsummer Day in a flash of lightning. But such a combination is artificial and unsupported, so far as I know, by any positive evidence. Whether on mythical principles the two interpretations can really be reconciled with each other or not, I will not presume to say, but even should they prove to be discrepant, the inconsistency need not have prevented our rude forefathers from embracing both of them at the same time with an equal fervour of conviction. For, like the great majority of mankind, the savage is above being hidebound by the trammels of a pedantic logic. In attempting to track his devious thought through the jungle of crass ignorance and blind fear, we must always remember that we are treading enchanted ground, and must beware of taking for solid realities the cloudy shapes that cross our path or hover and gibber at us through the gloom. We can never completely replace ourselves at the standpoint of primitive man, see things with his eyes, and feel our hearts beat with the emotions that stirred his. All our theories concerning him and his ways must therefore fall far short of certainty. The utmost we can aspire to in such matters is a reasonable degree of probability. To conclude these inquiries, we may say that if Balder was indeed, as I have conjectured, a personification of a mistletoe-bearing oak, his death by a blow of the mistletoe might, on the new theory, be explained as a death by a stroke of lightning. So long as the mistletoe in which the flame of the lightning smouldered was suffered to remain among the boughs, so long no harm could befall the good and kindly god of the oak, who kept his life stowed away for safety between earth and heaven in the mysterious parasite. But when once that seat of his life or of his death was torn from the branch and hurled at the trunk, the tree fell, the god died, smitten by a thunderbolt. And what we have said of Balder in the oak forests of Scandinavia may perhaps, with all due diffidence in a question so obscure and uncertain, be applied to the priest of Diana, the king of the wood, at Aricia in the oak forests of Italy. He may have personated in flesh and blood the great Italian god of the sky, Jupiter, who had kindly come down from heaven in the lightning flash to dwell among men in the mistletoe, the thunder besom, the golden bough, growing on the sacred oak in the dells of Nemi. If that was so, we need not wonder that the priest guarded with drawn sword the mystic bough which contained the god's life and his own. The goddess whom he served and married was herself, if I am right, no other than the Queen of Heaven, the true wife of the sky god. For she, too, loved the solitude of the woods and the lonely hills, and sailing overhead on clear nights in the likeness of the silver moon, looked down with pleasure on her own fair image reflected on the calm, the burnished surface of the lake, Diana's mirror. End of chapter 68. Chapter 69. Farewell to Nemi. We are at the end of our inquiry, but as often happens in the search after truth, if we have answered one question we have raised many more. If we have followed one track home, we have had to pass by others that opened off it and led, or seemed to lead, to far other goals than the sacred grove at Nemi. Some of these paths we have followed a little way; others, if fortune should be kind, the writer and the reader may one day pursue together. For the present we have journeyed far enough together, and it is time to part. Yet before we do so, we may well ask ourselves whether there is not some more general conclusion, some lesson, if possible, of hope and encouragement, to be drawn from the melancholy record of human error and folly which has engaged our attention in this book. If then we consider, on the one hand, the essential similarity of man's chief wants everywhere and at all times, and on the other hand the wide difference between the means he has adopted to satisfy them in different ages, we shall perhaps be disposed to conclude that the movement of the higher thought, so far as we can trace it, has on the whole been from magic through religion to science. In magic man depends on his own strength to meet the difficulties and dangers that beset him on every side. He believes in a certain established order of nature, on which he can surely count, and which he can manipulate for his own ends. When he discovers his mistake, when he recognises sadly that both the order of nature which he had assumed and the control which he had believed himself to exercise over it were purely imaginary, he ceases to rely on his own intelligence and his own unaided efforts, and throws himself humbly on the mercy of certain great invisible beings behind the veil of nature, to whom he now ascribes all those far-reaching powers which he once arrogated to himself. Thus, in the acuter minds, magic is gradually superseded by religion, which explains the succession of natural phenomena as regulated by the will, the passion, or the caprice of spiritual beings like man in kind, though vastly superior to him in power. But as time goes on, this explanation in its turn proves to be unsatisfactory, for it assumes that the succession of natural events is not determined by immutable laws, but is to some extent variable and irregular, and this assumption is not borne out by closer observation. On the contrary, the more we scrutinise that succession, the more we are struck by the rigid uniformity, the punctual precision with which, wherever we can follow them, the operations of nature are carried on. Every great advance in knowledge has extended the sphere of order, and correspondingly restricted the sphere of apparent disorder in the world, till now we are ready to anticipate that even in regions where chance and confusion appear still to reign, a fuller knowledge would everywhere reduce the seeming chaos to cosmos. Thus the keener minds, still pressing forward to a deeper solution of the mysteries of the universe, come to reject the religious theory of nature as inadequate, and to revert in measure to the older standpoint of magic by postulating explicitly what in magic had only been implicitly assumed, to wit, an inflexible regularity in the order of natural events, which, if carefully observed, enables us to foresee their course with certainty, and to act accordingly. In short, religion, regarded as an explanation of nature, is displaced by science. But while science has this much in common with magic, that both rest on a faith in order as the underlying principle of all things, readers of this work will hardly need to be reminded that the order presupposed by magic differs widely from that which forms the basis of science. The difference flows naturally from the different modes on which the two orders have been reached. For whereas the order on which magic reckons is merely an extension, by false analogy, of the order in which ideas present themselves to our minds, the order laid down by science is derived from patient and exact observation of the phenomena themselves. The abundance, the solidity, and the splendour of the results already achieved by science are well fitted to inspire us with a cheerful confidence in the soundness of its method. Here at last, after groping about in the dark for countless ages, man has hit upon a clue to the labyrinth, a golden key that opens many locks in the treasury of nature. It is probably not too much to say that the hope of progress, moral and intellectual as well as material, in the future is bound up with the fortunes of science, and that every obstacle placed in the way of scientific discovery is a wrong to humanity. Yet the history of thought should warn us against concluding that because the scientific theory of the world is the best that has yet been formulated, it is necessarily complete and final. We must remember that at bottom the generalisations of science, or, in common parlance, the laws of nature, are merely hypotheses devised to explain that ever-shifting phantasmagoria of thought which we dignify with the high-sounding names of the world and the universe. In the last analysis, magic, religion, and science are nothing but theories of thought, and as science has supplanted its predecessors, so it may hereafter be itself superseded by some more perfect hypothesis, perhaps by some totally different way of looking at the phenomena, of registering the shadows on the screen, of which we in this generation can form no idea. The advance of knowledge is an infinite progression towards a goal that for ever recedes. We need not murmur at the endless pursuit. Fatti non fosti a viver come bruti, ma per seguir virtute e conoscenza. Great things will come of that pursuit, though we may not enjoy them. Brighter stars will rise on some voyager of the future, some great Ulysses of the realms of thought, than shine on us. The dreams of magic may one day be the waking realities of science. But a dark shadow lies athwart the far end of this fair prospect. For however vast the increase of knowledge and of power which the future may have in store for man, he can scarcely hope to stay the sweep of those great forces which seem to be making silently but relentlessly for the destruction of this starry universe in which our earth swims as a speck or mote. In the ages to come man may be able to predict, perhaps even to control, the wayward courses of the winds and clouds, but hardly will his puny hands have strength to speed afresh our slackening planet in its orbit, or rekindle the dying fire of the sun. Yet the philosopher who trembles at the idea of such distant catastrophes may console himself by reflecting that these gloomy apprehensions, like the earth and the sun themselves, are only parts of that unsubstantial world which thought has conjured up out of the void, and that the phantoms which the subtle enchantress has evoked to-day she may ban to-morrow. They too, like so much that to common eyes seems solid, may melt into air, into thin air. Without dipping so far into the future, we may illustrate the course which thought has hitherto run by likening it to a web woven of three different threads, the black thread of magic, the red thread of religion, and the white thread of science, if under science we may include those simple truths, drawn from observation of nature, of which men in all ages have possessed a store. Could we then survey the web of thought from the beginning, we should probably perceive it to be at first a chequer of black and white, a patchwork of true and false notions, hardly tinged as yet by the red thread of religion. But carry your eye farther along the fabric, and you will remark that while the black and white chequer still runs through it, there rests on the middle portion of the web, where religion has entered most deeply into its texture, a dark crimson stain, which shades off insensibly into a lighter tint as the white thread of science is woven more and more into the tissue. To a web thus chequered and stained, thus shot with threads of diverse hues, but gradually changing colour the farther it is unrolled, the state of modern thought, with all its divergent aims and conflicting tendencies, may be compared. Will the great movement which for centuries has been slowly altering the complexion of thought be continued in the near future, or will a reaction set in which may arrest progress, and even undo much that has been done? To keep up our parable, what will be the colour of the web which the Fates are now weaving on the humming loom of time? Will it be white or red? We cannot tell. A faint glimmering light illumines the backward portion of the web. Clouds and thick darkness hide the other end. Our long voyage of discovery is over, and our bark has drooped her weary sails in port at last. Once more we take the road to Nemi. It is evening, and as we climb the long slope of the Appian Way up to the Alban Hills, we look back and see the sky aflame with sunset, its golden glory resting like the aureole of a dying saint over Rome, and touching with a crest of fire the dome of St. Peter's. The sight once seen can never be forgotten, but we turn from it and pursue our way darkling along the mountain side, till we come to Nemi, and look down on the lake in its deep hollow, now fast disappearing in the evening shadows. The place has changed but little since Diana received the homage of her worshippers in the sacred grove. The temple of the sylvan goddess indeed has vanished, and the King of the Wood no longer stands sentinel over the Golden Bough. But Nemi's woods are still green, and as the sunset fades above them in the west, there comes to us, borne on the swell of the wind, the sound of the church bells of Rome ringing the Angelus. Ave Maria! Sweet and solemn they chime out from the distant city, and die lingeringly away across the wide Campagnan marshes. Le roi est mort! Vive le roi! Ave Maria! End of The Golden Bough.